Well, US conservatives are on a roll. Age verification to protect children from pornographic websites, allowing US states to defund abortionist Planned Parenthood, the Supreme Court defending religious freedom and parental rights over LGBT curriculum. 10 years since the same-sex marriage case in the US, and there's calls to return to the correct definition of marriage, and celebrating 3 years since Roe v. Wade's historic reversal. Even the New York legislature has passed a bill requiring social media warning labels. Conservatives in the US just can't stop winning at the moment, and there's significant pushback even on the definition of marriage. Just imagine if same-sex marriage was repealed. Glenn Stanton is the Director of Global Family Formation Studies at Focus on the Family. He's a good buddy, friend of Family First, has spoken at our forum on the family previously, and we get his take on all these developments. So Glenn, always good to have you. I think you're coming live to us from Colorado Springs, is that correct?
From lovely Colorado Springs, where I work, where I live.
Okay, Focus on the Family. We love that organization. And in fact, I'm attending a conference in a couple of weeks. So looking forward to that. Not in Colorado, though. Now, look, we've got a few topics to get through because it's just quite fascinating watching what's going on, and we can get some commentary as we go through it. So let me start with the Texas one. So the Supreme Court says that Texas can demand age verification legislation for pornography websites, which seems like a major victory to protect young people from the damaging effects of online pornography. Was this decision a surprise?
It was a little bit of a surprise. I mean, the question was a whole bunch of pornographers came and were trying to fight the state of Texas, saying we don't have to prove age verification for our viewers, meaning we don't have to keep our stuff from minors. And the Attorney General for Texas, Paxton, he fought that, took it all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court decided 6-3, three liberal justices siding with the pornographers under the guise of free speech, saying that they didn't have to prove age limitation. But the majority of the court says, no, absolutely you do. The right to show pornography to kids is not a guaranteed right.
No, and I don't think free speech is about young children being exposed to hardcore pornography. So it seems like a slam dunk, but Texas has sort of set the way on this one, haven't they? Is there going to be a domino effect, do you think?
Well, it will be. I mean, this basically applies to all states, that all states now can demand that pornographers demonstrate that they are not showing their stuff to underage kids. And that's a great, great thing. Age verification will be demanded in each of the 50 states.
Okay, the second decision, also just before last weekend, was that the Supreme Court ruled in favour of parental rights and religious freedom over LGBT curriculum in classrooms. The interesting thing on this one, Glenn, is that actually New Zealand is ahead of you. We have a section in our Act that says that parents have the right to withdraw their kids from this type of curriculum. The interesting thing is that a lot of parents don't know about it, and a lot of schools operate under the radar and have been, under previous governments, have been trying to infiltrate it into other subjects, and we've called them out on that. But interestingly, the Supreme Court, once again, 6-3 decision. Glenn, this just reminds me of just how significant it was when Trump defeated Hillary Clinton, because Trump was able to appoint some justices who had common sense and conservative values. Well, hey.
No, and that's exactly right. And the case that we had here in the United States was a little suburb right outside Washington, D.C. Schools were not letting parents opt their kids out of radical LGBT, radical sexual education and stuff, saying, no, you've got to keep your kids in these schools. And so a very diverse group of religiously motivated parents, Christians, Mormons, Muslim, Jewish, they said they took their case all the way to the Supreme Court that said we have a right to opt our kids out. And the court agreed. And I saw this as pretty much a slam dunk case because
Mm.
it was an overreach of these educators to say, no, we don't care what you think, parents. You are going to submit your kids to this radical sexual education. And I mean, that wasn't going to fly. So it is very nice, very good that 6 members of the Supreme Court stood against the other liberal 3 to say,
Mm.
oh, yeah, absolutely. Parents have a right to dictate and drive the education of their children.
Okay, well, that was one where you were catching up with New Zealand. So well done. Welcome to some common sense. It's just a reminder to Kiwi parents who are watching this that under
Yeah.
legislation, the Education and Training Act, you have the right to withdraw kids. And read our parent guide, parentguide.nz. You get all the legal backing. There's even a sample letter to get the exception to remove your children from that education. But it's available in the US now. So actually, was that was that nationwide, or was that in a particular state, and so it will have the domino effect?
It started in a particular community, but it will have a domino effect. This
Right.
establishes that parents have the universal right to opt their kids out of this kind of education.
Okay, another local one, and the Supreme Court ruled once again 6-3 in favour of South Carolina's plan to defund the abortionist and the chemicalization and castration of gender confused kids as well, Planned Parenthood. And once again, this is going to have a domino effect. Glenn, is Planned Parenthood panicking?
Well, they are panicking. They're panicking in a big way because not only, was this Supreme Court decision decided on, but our Congress right now is voting on whether to fully defund Planned Parenthood. And it looks like we're
Brilliant.
moving in that direction. But the South Carolina case is very, very interesting. And it was very strategic from the perspective of the state of South Carolina. They basically declare, them being a largely strong pro-family state, they say, we're not going to let our Medicaid dollars, and the state oversees the use of those Medicaid dollars, we're not going to let our Medicaid dollars go to fund abortion because Planned Parenthood is getting quite wealthy off of using those Medicaid funds. And so they fought that, and it went up the court system all the way to the Supreme Court. And this court, a good, reasonable, logical court, said, yeah, South Carolina has and other states have the right to determine how Medicaid payments, those are federal and state payments for medical care and things like that. We can determine where these go to, and we don't think they should go to Planned Parenthood.
Yeah, great decision. Look, something's going weird when New York, which isn't the bastion of conservatism in any way, but when lawmakers pass a bill requiring social media platforms to display mental health warning labels. This one is kind of a quirky one because I haven't sort of heard of campaigns for this around health warning labels. You hear about it on alcohol and on tobacco, etc. Is this warning labels to all users, or is this just for children? I mean, is this on the back of Jonathan Haidt's, anxious generation type calls?
Yeah, see, you touched on it. I mean, you said like this was kind of a surprising one coming out of New York, but Jonathan Haidt, his work that you guys have highlighted so nicely, liberals are starting to wake up to this kind of stuff. And you asked the question about whether this applies to kids or not. I'm not actually sure.
Seems to be just general.
Regardless, this is a very, very good thing to say that social media has like real significant harms to children and to adults, but predominantly to children because their judgment and their ability is not quite as matured and developed as it should. But I think, I mean, we're seeing this, and I hear friends from Silicon Valley, leaders in Silicon Valley that have no conservative bone in their body, but they realize with their own families and with their own kids, they're like, you know what? We're not going to let our kids have access to this because we know how manipulative it is. And so liberals and conservatives as a whole are really realizing that social media does have a significant downside to it and that we need to
Mm.
protect young people and young adults from it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, when it comes out of New York, there's something in the water, and
Yeah,
everybody's starting to sit up. I mean, the whistleblowers from social media, of course, are starting to speak up about how the algorithms have deliberately targeted young people,
yeah,
deliberately tried to addict them. So that's starting to
yeah.
come out. Look, just before we get onto the marriage one, I'll just touch on the Roe v. Wade. So it's been 3 years since the overturning of the abortion law in the United States. The New Zealand media went apoplectic when this happened. It was like the end of the world. I was just looking at the data from Daily Citizen, and we link to these articles on our website so people can check these.
Hmm.
I see abortion remains broadly legal in 31 states. There's near total bans in 12 states and gestational limits on the books in 7 states. So what's that, 31 to 19? It's still sort of a very divisive issue, isn't it?
Well, it is a very, very divisive issue, but at least the striking down of Roe v. Wade, and we in America fought this for decades. Since 1973 up to 3 years ago, Roe v. Wade, abortion on demand, was the law of the land. And
Mm,
states really had no say in this. But what we
mm,
have is a situation now where we have the 50 states can do what they and their citizens feel like is just and right with
mm,
abortion. And abortion is starting to roll back state by state
mm,
by state, as you laid out. And that's a very positive turn. At least the babies that are able to come to term and live in these pro life states are very, very thankful for this change in United States law. And it's,
and
if you're a believer in democracy
mm,
and you want to let people be able to express their opinions on these things and fight for just pro life laws, um, striking down Roe v. Wade was a very, very good thing.
and of those 31 states where abortion remains broadly legal, does that mean broadly legal late term right up to 40 weeks? Is that like just
Well,
uh, on demand?
yeah, here in Colorado, I mean, Colorado, and we have a wonderful, beautiful state, Bob. You've been
Mm,
here.
beautiful.
Um, our state house is just turned over to the Democrats, to the
I know.
liberals. And basically, we have a situation in Colorado where any woman can get an abortion right up to the time of birth, really no questions asked. Colorado has been an abortion sanctuary state. A number of states are not that radical, but some are. And so they have varying degrees of limitation. But wherever the Planned Parenthood crowd, wherever the pro abortion crowd is winning, they do not tolerate any limitations on what they call the right to
Mm,
abortion. It's so funny that even the National Rifle Association will tolerate more limitations on
mm.
gun use than the abortion providers
Yeah.
provide or allow on abortion
Mm,
themselves. They will not tolerate any restrictions whatsoever.
yeah. And for the benefit of viewers, in 2018, I traveled to Colorado, and Glenn took me on a tour around some of the hot spots of weed. We were checking out the marijuana industry and the effective legalization. It was clearly a disaster. And has there actually, this wasn't on our run sheet, Glenn, but has there been
Yeah.
any move to push back on legalization? We saw in Thailand where after 3 years, they're turning it around because they've seen the disaster. Has there been any noise around overturning the legalization of cannabis just because of the social disaster it is?
Unfortunately, there hasn't been. And in Colorado
Mm,
Springs, where I live, we just recently passed recreational marijuana use. But our leaders, our policemen, people who work in
Mm,
hospitals, people who work with youth and young people, like they understand this has
mm,
not been a good thing for our state. And
mm.
so the stats are there, the figures are there, the facts are there, but unfortunately, they're not turning things around to
No,
push this back. And that's because the industry is so powerful and the
yeah.
tax money that comes from this industry is so persuasive. But
Mm,
anybody who comes here can see that it has
mm,
turned our state into a less beautiful state.
mm.
Manufacturers are leaving our state because they
Yeah.
can't find, entry level workers, blue collar workers that can pass drug tests.
Yeah, well, you can not only see it, you can smell it. You said
Yeah.
that they've just legalized recreational marijuana. Did you mean to say recreational magic mushrooms? Which
Well, no, recreational marijuana in our city. We have a very
oh, in city,
conservative
yes.
city, and they
Okay.
pushed and they pushed and they pushed, and that
Mm,
finally passed in our city. But no, you're right. The whole mushroom thing came along
mm.
later,
Yep,
and that's the current push now is
yep.
the use of these psychedelic mushrooms and things like that, as if we need anything else to increasingly wig our Coloradan citizens out.
Okay, so still some work to do. Look, let's just finally finish on the topic, which probably was the impetus for us to get together and discuss this. Last week marked the 10th anniversary of the landmark US Supreme Court Obergefell versus Hodges. So that was the decision that redefined marriage and the family by nationalizing the desexing of both. In other words, doing away with the gender
Yeah.
requirements and therefore confusing the whole definition around father, mother. We can't even define what a woman is now. I was interested to see. Now you have written a very good article, which we will link to, where you give 4 reasons. I want to ask you that. Just before I do, though, it seems that this isn't actually completely out of bounds to even be talking about this. The New York Times were
Right.
concerned about it. I saw the Southern Baptists have voted to seek repeal of it, and I see that
Hmm.
support for gay marriage has plummeted amongst Republicans. So boy, there's certainly a turn around. Perhaps if you could just sum up from your article, what are the 4 reasons why the definition of marriage needs to be restored to its rightful definition?
Well, you've laid this out very nicely and focus on the family again with the Southern Baptist Convention and a number of other pro family organizations are saying, like, just like Roe v. Wade, we are not going to accept, when we said in Roe v. Wade, abortion, we're not going to accept that being the law of the land. We are not going to accept the redefinition and the desexing of marriage through Obergefell, that we're going to work to overturn this. And the four
Mm,
reasons are this. First of all, and you laid it out, when you say that a mother father family, husband wife family can be replaced by 2 guys or 2 women, that essentially tells us that men don't matter for the family. They're
mm,
just merely preferential, and that women don't matter for the family. And if they
mm,
don't matter for the family, then they don't matter for society. And it is no coincidence that within hours of Obergefell being handed down in the United States in the end of June of 2015, that Bruce Jenner appeared on the cover of Vanity Fair as his new alter ego, Caitlyn, and that was the launch of the transgender revolution. There was
mm,
literally no daylight between the two of those events happening. And that was
mm,
no coincidence because, again, like I said, when you strike down the necessity of man or woman for marriage or the family, then
mm,
male or female just mean nothing to anybody.
mm,
And that's what launched the trans movement. So that's the first thing,
mhm,
is that same-sex marriage obliterates our objective understanding of what it means to be male or female. The
mhm,
second reason, Bob, is this, and you guys at Family First know this very well. Every same sex family that involves children that were intentionally and by design denied the love and care of their own mother and father for one simple reason, and that was because two men or two women wanted a family like that. That same-sex marriage and the same-sex family says children have to be denied their own mother and father, what they need in order to give adults what they want. That is never a moral calculation. It is always an immoral calculation. So that's the second thing. The third is that same-sex marriage erases what it means to be female. Now, and I say this in another piece that I wrote for the Federalist, that most of the books back in the early 2000s that were making the case for same-sex marriage were all written by men. They were making the case for desexing marriage and casting women out of it. The argument for same-sex marriage says women don't matter. And that is a radical misogynistic statement. And that is what same-sex marriage and the case for same-sex marriage purports. And the fourth reason is what Justice Clarence Thomas said in his dissent in the Obergefell decision, and that is that it's just based on bad law. He says the founders of our nation never would have recognized in a zillion years a right to desexing marriage, a right to form same-sex marital and familial unions. But the majority in Obergefell said, like, oh no, that's a fundamental right of liberty to be able to do that. And Clarence Thomas was right. And the other dissenting justices, that's another point to recognize, that Obergefell was really decided by just one vote. That was Justice Kennedy, who was persuaded by the majority to fall in that line with the liberal justices. And all the conservative justices thought this was just a travesty. So no, this wasn't clear, and it is certainly not in our United States Constitution, the fundamental right to desex the family and to deny every child that a same-sex family touches its fundamental right to its own mother and father. But that is exactly what the Obergefell decision did. So those four reasons are why Focus on the Family is calling and standing with so many other good, strong, pro-family organizations to overturn Obergefell.
And I remember when same-sex marriage was redefined here, and we realized that really this wasn't the end of the game. The game is to confuse gender, because if you confuse gender, you confuse the definition of families, you confuse the definition of father, mother, woman, man, boy, girl. And basically it comes against the natural order. And of course, just to remind you, you were the author of a report that we did back in, I think it was 2015, you know.
It was a while ago.
Yeah. And look, when we published that, and that's available on our website, it really is pointing to where we have got to. I guess the question, Glenn, is what chance do you think that same-sex marriage can be overturned? Because you're coming up against corporate, you're coming up against media, you're coming up against politicians who possibly haven't got a backbone to stomach the opposition on this one. So what's the chances?
Yeah. I tend to be an optimist. It took us nearly, I'm not real good on my math, but
50 years,
over
50 years for Roe v. Wade.
Overturn.
Yeah.
It took us over 3 decades to overturn Roe v. Wade. Yeah. I think we could do that with Obergefell faster, because people are seeing that the legalization of same-sex marriage was not just about being kind. It was not just about being inclusive. This was about radically redefining not just marriage, not just the family, but radically redefining the meaning of what it means to be human itself. And you expressed that in the lead up to our discussion here, that polling is sort of increasingly declining for the idea of same-sex marriage and the same-sex family. And I think as the craziness of gender ideology continues, and the more people see that, the more bad taste they're going to have about what it
Mm,
was that Obergefell brought us. And so it's going to
mm,
be hard. It's going to be difficult. We are going to have to go out there and make our case. We're going to have to explain why the same sex family is so detrimental to children, primarily simply because it denies children their own mother and father. But this is
mm,
a battle that we have to fight. This is work that we have to do. And we are going to engage this work and we are going to make this case. And we are not going to settle for the desexing and the degendering of marriage, the erasure of male and female from the importance of family. We're not going to allow that to
mm.
stand.
So, I mean, you've got age verification on porn. You've got parental rights in schools against radical sexuality and gender. You've got defunding of Planned Parenthood, possibly. You've got labels on social media in New York.
Yep.
And you've got discussion around overturning same-sex marriage. It seems like US conservatives are on a roll. Does it feel like that?
Yeah. It really does feel like that. And a lot of that has to do and come down to elections matter.
Yeah.
Um, the people that we worked hard to vote in
Mm,
and to represent us, they
mm,
are starting to make a recovery for just common sense. Um, you know, when President Trump, just hours when he was in office this last January, he signed an executive order to say it is now the policy of the United States that there are only two sexes, male and female, and that those are real and that those are
yeah.
right. I mean, that was an absolute return to common sense. And you can
Mm,
complain about President Trump all day long about, concerns, his morals, things like that. But I tell you what, I will take returns, strong, confident returns to common sense like that all day long. And we celebrate that here at
mm.
Focus on the Family.
Well, it always does have a flow-on effect. The left in New Zealand always calls it an imported culture war, unless they actually want the culture war like drag queens and libraries. So they can't quite figure out what they
Yeah.
want. But it's very interesting just observing what's going on. And like I say, I do hark back to the fact that when Trump defeated Hillary Clinton in 2016, that was crucial because it set up that ability for not only the legislature, but the Supreme
Yeah.
Court to lean more conservative. I mean, you haven't won every case, I noticed, in the Supreme Court. The Conservatives have surprised some people with some decisions. But I think what I appreciate about them is that
Mhm.
they consider the law and its role more than their
Yeah.
ideology. And I think that's an important change, isn't it?
It's an extremely important change. We call it, these judges being originalists is like, what did the Constitution actually say? Not what do you think it should say?
Yeah,
And that's very, very true. And these judges that have been appointed, you're right, we haven't won everything, and there have been some bad decisions, but on the whole, things tend to be moving in the right direction. And
yeah.
all of that could change in another election. And that's why we've got to be absolutely vigilant to continue to fight for good common sense politicians that are fearless and will fight for truth, common sense, and what is
Mm,
best for kids and what is best for families.
yeah. Glenn, always good to catch up with you. Really appreciate the work of Focus on the Family and Daily Citizen, where I get a lot of my news feed from because it's a media I can trust. There's no fake news. So keep up the great work, and I'm sure we'll be in touch. You are our revered US correspondent. So thanks for your time.
I look forward to it, Bob. Thank you, man.